I want to thank you guys, troopers, for coming out. And here we are. We're at Tisha B'Av. Just out of curiosity, how many of you guys were actually anticipating that Mashiach would come and we would be able to feast today? All right. Yes. You know, I was until about 2 days ago. 2 days ago, 2 days before Tisha B'Av, there was a news piece in the newspaper about a leading ultra-Orthodox rabbi who came out and said that people who wear a kippah sruga are not Jews, they are Amalek, and they need to be eliminated from the world. Now, I don't know if you heard this, but it was all over the blogosphere, which I happen to, unfortunately, now be a part of. And I wanted to tear my clothes. I really just broke down at that moment and started crying. That someone who is supposed to be considered a role model and a leader for the Jewish people would make a statement like that. So, until that moment, yeah, I was anticipating. We're not fasting this Tisha B'Av. Mashiach can still come. Mashiach's going to come, and we're not going, and we're all going to be rejoicing together, and the Beit HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt, and we're just not going to have to do this anymore. And then I looked at it and I thought, we're going to be fasting for a very long time. Somebody posted on Facebook a joke. They meant to be joke. They meant to be humorous, I think. And it basically said this. It said, us. God, it's been 2,000 years. How much longer do we have to wait? How much longer till we have the temple? God, you'd think after 2,000 years you'd figure out how to get along. We've been going at this for, well, 1900, between 1900 and 2,000 years, and we still don't get it, which of course is part of the reason, really the main reason why we are mourning, fasting on Tisha B'Av, right? Is because, not so much because the temple was destroyed, but because we still don't get it, and we still don't have a new one. Well, you guys have all heard that before. So going back to this rabbi's statement that people with kippah sruga are Amalek, I thought I would ask the question, who really is Amalek? I mean, what do we see from the Tanakh, and how can we fight Amalek? I wanted to address that issue. Now, in the davening, in the siddur, at least in the Art Scroll siddur, I don't know about the all Hebrew siddurs and if they have this or not, but in the Art Scroll siddur, after Shacharit, after the morning prayers, is a list of readings, of things that we should read every day. Right? We have the 13 principles of faith, we have the 10 commandments, and we have something called the 6 remembrances, right? One of the 6 remembrances is that we're supposed to remember Amalek. That we're supposed to remember. Now, this is actually very interesting because Hashem tells us that we're supposed to remember to wipe out his memory, which always kind of confused me. Like, what does that mean? Remember to wipe? If we wipe out his memory, then how can we remember? And anyway, it kind of makes me go in circles. But we first see Amalek show up in Parshat Bashalach in Shemot, right? The children of Israel, they've come to this place called Rephidim. There's no water. They ask Moshe for water. Moshe goes to Hashem and prays and asks God, what am I going to do? And Hashem tells Moshe to take the stick, the rod that he has, he and Aaron, they're supposed to gather everybody together. He's supposed to go over to the rock. He's supposed to hit the rock with the stick the first time. He hits the rock with the stick, and it's going to bring forth water, right? And it does. It brings forth water. And then it says that then the Jewish people, then the people of Israel were attacked by Amalek. All right. Now, at the end of this account of us being attacked by Amalek, Hashem tells Moshe that he is supposed to keep it as a remembrance and tell Joshua, Yehoshua, that he's supposed to write it in the book, and that it's supposed to be recited in the ears of Joshua, and that he's going to erase the memory of Amalek under the heavens. So that's what Hashem says. Now, when I first read this, I was like, kind of intrigued by that. That's a huge decree that there's this one people group that attacked us that God would absolutely destroy the entire people group. I mean, they're not the only people who have attacked the Jewish nation. I mean, we could name, the Moabites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the theseites and the thoseites, right? We could go down a whole list of nations that have attacked the Jewish people. Why specifically does Amalek get this really, really harsh decree? And we don't find out, actually, it's funny because Amalek shows up a couple of more times, and we don't actually figure out why it is that Hashem gives him this harsh decree until we get to almost the end of the Torah, until we get to Devarim chapter 25, and I'm actually going to read it to you here. But you've all heard it before. This is what's quoted when we remember the 6 remembrances. It says, "Remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you were leaving Egypt, that he happened upon you on the way, and he struck those of you who were hindmost. All the weaklings at your rear when you were faint and exhausted, and he did not fear God. It shall be that when Hashem your God gives you rest from all your enemies all around in the land that Hashem your God gives you as an inheritance to possess it, you shall wipe out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget." Wow. Now we get it. It takes almost the entire Torah for us to get to the point where Hashem actually explains what happened to us. Obviously, the people of Israel knew and understood why, but us reading from the outside, we're just like, wow, I mean, that's a pretty harsh decree. Why on earth would he do such thing? Would Hashem give such a harsh decree? And of course, now we see the explanation and we go, of course. Because what did he do? He didn't just attack the nation, right? He attacked those who were at the back, who were the weak, who were the tired, who were the vulnerable, the ones who couldn't keep up, who were struggling to stay with the nation. That's not just cowardly, that's actually inhumane. And that is the MO of Amalek. So it's interesting because a few weeks ago we had Parshat Chukat, where Amalek reappears. Now his name isn't actually mentioned in Parshat Chukat. What happens is we have this other scene, which is reminiscent of Bishalach. Moshe, the people are complaining to Moshe, we have no water. Hashem says to Moshe, I want you to take the rod. I want you to gather the people around this rock. And this time I want you to speak to the rock, and it's going to bring forth water. And of course, we all know that fateful story. Instead of speaking to the rock, Moshe hits the rock, therefore sealing his fate never to enter the land of Israel. And then, just like in parallel to Bishalach, now the children of Israel are approached, but it doesn't say by Amalek. It says that they're approached by the Canaanite king of the south from Arad. Now, I'm not going to get into all of the pieces, but when we do a little research, we find out that it was not the Canaanites who lived in the south. The Canaanites actually lived on the coast. The Canaanites were like seafaring people, and the people who lived in the south were Amalek. We're actually told in the Torah that Amalek dwelled in the south. So Rashi explains that what this was it was actually Amalek who was coming to fight the Jewish people, but he was pretending to be this Canaanite king because, let's face it, the Jewish people already knew what to expect from Amalek. So if it wasn't Amalek, they would be caught off guard. So here he comes, and what does he do? Does he just attack the Jewish people like every other nation attacks the Jewish people? No. He takes a captive. It's all part of this MO of Amalek. He takes a captive. He goes for the ones at the rear. He goes for the ones who are most vulnerable. Okay? And part of the reason for this is that Amalek has like this intense, innate hatred for the children of Israel. I mean, it's pretty clear. Why does somebody take captives? Think about it. Like in warfare, right? Why does somebody take captives? There are only two reasons why you take a captive. The first reason is as a bargaining chip, right? And that's what we've learned from our Arab cousins, right? They capture a soldier and they use him as a bargaining chip to get something that they want. Sometimes it's 1,000 terrorists freed, sometimes it's something else, but he's used as a bargaining chip. That's very simple. It's very elementary thinking. It's very childish thinking. It's very simple, not very complicated, not very clever. And that's the method that we see with our Arab brothers and cousins, But the other reason that somebody would take a captive is because they want to dehumanize them, right? You take a captive, we've all heard of like the Stockholm syndrome and stuff like that. You take a captive, you try to convince him that he's been fighting on the wrong side all along. You demoralize him, you dehumanize him. A lot of times there's a lot of torture involved. It makes the rest of his people despair as they're trying to figure out how to get him back. Sometimes what you do is you brainwash him and then you send him back into the ranks to try to convince his brethren that they're also fighting for the wrong side. That is a much more complicated, a much more clever MO. And that is the MO of Amalek. That he is not doing what he does simply to destroy the Jewish people. If he did, he could have destroyed us 1,000 times already. And of course, we see that, God says in Bishalach that he's going to fight Amalek in every generation. And we can, of course, go through the history and we can recount who we might think was Amalek in every generation, right? We have clear evidence that Nazis and the Holocaust was the Amalek, so to speak, of the last generation. And if you think about it, what was the purpose for what he did to the Jewish people? It wasn't just to destroy us, and it wasn't to use us as a bargaining chip. It was to dehumanize us. It was to demoralize us. It was to try to get us to think of ourselves as if we were subhuman. And there's a lot of reasons that I'm not going to get into about what that does for the captor as far as making him feel more powerful and all of that stuff. But if the Shoah represents Amalek of the last generation, then who is Amalek for this generation? Is Rabbi Cohen correct? Is it those of us who wear a kippah sruga? Are we the ones who are Amalek? Or is it something else? Now, Rabbi Cohen, I'm sure, giving him a little of Dan L'chaf Zchut, when he said that people who wear kippah sruga are Amalek, what he was referring to, most likely, was the battle with technology and modernity and all of these things that we have to, the popular culture, all of these things that we have to deal with from day to day, which really do threaten the Jewish people. So in a way, he might have been on the right track, but he was really he was really wrong. Hashem is at war with Amalek in every generation. So who is Amalek for our generation? Who targets the weak, the vulnerable, the needy, those who are on the edge, those who are struggling to stay a part of the nation? Now, a few weeks ago when I gave this talk, I actually made the case for Amalek of our generation to be missionary Christianity. And I certainly think I did a good job. However, I'm going to resist the temptation to make that case today, because the truth is it really doesn't matter who Amalek is for this generation. The solution to fighting him is the same. And the problem that causes him to be able to have an advantage over us is also the same. Whether we call it missionary Christianity or modern culture or technology or convenience or whatever other things cause us to abandon what we know is right because it's too hard in favor of those things. But the truth is that in a way, Rabbi Cohen was correct, sort of. We're not Amalek, but we're all co-conspirators with him. Every single one of us. Whether we wear a kippah sruga or a velvet kippah, a sheitel or a scarf or nothing, those of us who know Hashem and those of us who consider ourselves Torah observant, we are all guilty of being co-conspirators with Amalek. Why? Because how on earth is it that Amalek can possibly attack those who are at the rear, take a captive? If we were an army, how could he do that? The only way that he could do that, the only way that he could be successful is if we don't have a rear guard. Who doesn't have a rear guard? Now we could get into which tribe was supposed to be doing that and where their failings were and all of that, but in the modern day understanding of what I'm trying to talk about, we don't have a rear guard. And what's happening is all of us, the entire Jewish people, obviously each individual person is, I'm lumping everybody together, but as a Jewish people, we have been taking those who are trying to connect with Judaism and have failed to connect with Judaism in a meaningful way for whatever reason, and we are actually opening the door and pushing them out the door ourselves. We are actually the ones who are causing them to go to the rear, to go to the fringe, to become the weak and the vulnerable, those who are struggling to stay a part of the Jewish people. And it's all of us. It doesn't matter what we wear on our head or how we dress or what we call ourselves. And the solution is the same no matter what. The end result of pushing people to the rear is that they become available for Amalek to pick us off. So, what is the solution? How can we get ourselves out of this position of being co-conspirators with Amalek, really? So the answer is that it doesn't matter who Amalek is. We have to identify how he operates. And the solution is threefold. The first part of the solution is that we ourselves have to give to the next generation a Judaism that is deep and meaningful and relevant, and that helps them to connect so that they're not left straggling at the rear. We have to give them a Judaism that's about having a relationship with God instead of about just having a bunch of rules. Do you know when people look at what's going on between us with women of the wall and women for the wall, or this rabbi who says that people who wear knitted kippahs are Amalek, or all of these different things that we do, the rest of the world looks at us and all they see is a bunch of petty, divisive people who are all about arguing, and nowhere in the picture do they see anything about having a relationship with God. Nowhere in the picture do they see anything about love. All they see is we care about our rules and who keeps them and who doesn't. And so the thing that we have to do is give over to the next generation. And it doesn't matter whether you have children or don't have children, whether your children are grown or they're still little. We are all constantly giving over to the next generation the Judaism that we have created by being a part of this Jewish people. And we have to give over to the next generation an understanding that Judaism is about having an intimate relationship with God. Now, a relationship is going to look different depending on who's involved in the relationship. My relationship with Meira is going to look different than my relationship with Yehudit. And my relationship with my husband is going to look different than your relationship with your husband or wife, because we're different people and we relate to each other in a different way. And our understanding and what makes us happy and how to be fulfilled and all of that is different because we're complex people. And so we have to understand, not only we have to give over the fact that it's a relationship with God, but we also have to give over the fact that relationships don't look the same, and that's okay. The second thing that we need to do is we need to understand that you cannot give what you yourself do not possess. I know so many Orthodox Jewish people who say, yes, I want to give this over to the next generation. Help me to help my children understand about having a relationship with God, about it being meaningful. Help me to help my children get engaged and get involved. They send their kids to NCSY or other outreach organizations, B'nai Akiva, whatever it is that they're choosing. They send them there in hopes that they're going to get inspired, in hopes that they're going to get something, while they themselves sit at home completely uninspired. And so what that requires is that some of us have to ask ourselves the difficult question. Am I plugged in? Am I lit up? Am I on fire? Am I excited? Do I actually have a relationship with God? Or is my Judaism just something I'm doing because, well, everybody needs a moral compass and we all need something to do, and this is good, it's what was handed down to me, and I've got a bunch of rules to follow and it gives my life some sort of meaning, or at least structure. But we have to ask ourselves, am I really connected? Do I really believe that there is a God? There's a difference between believing there's a God and knowing there's a God. Most of us know that there's a God. We look at the evidence and we know. But there's lots of other things that we know too. We know it's bad to smoke, but a lot of us do anyway. We know it's bad to eat lots of fattening foods, but most of us do anyway. We know that, a person who drinks too much knows that drinking too much isn't good for them. It's not like they don't know it, but knowing something doesn't make one bit of difference until you believe it. It has to be something that you can transfer from here to here. And then once you believe it, the way you know that you believe something is because it influences your behavior. It actually changes the way we behave. That's called integrity. Integrity is when something is in line, right? When we talk about like the alignment of one's back, what happens if your back is out of alignment? Not only do you get back pains, but you have all kinds of other problems as well, right? Because in order to be healthy, your body has to be in alignment. And in order to be spiritually healthy, our beliefs, our behaviors have to be in alignment with our beliefs. If your behaviors, your choices, and the things that you do and say do not coincide with what you say you believe, then probably it's something you know, but it's not something you believe. You've got it up here, but you don't have it in here. And so remember I'm on number 2 about what we can do to battle Amalek. In order to give over to the next generation a meaningful relationship with God and a connection to God within the context of Judaism, we have to first make sure that we have that and that we're plugged in and that we believe and not just know. And the third piece, which is really the most important piece, is that we must stop looking at other Jews based on how they dress and put them in a box and label them and judge them. Now, I'm not just talking about somebody who wears jeans and a spaghetti strap t-shirt. In fact, in the modern Orthodox world, we're pretty good at being tolerant of people who would put in that category because we can understand where they're coming from. But it also includes the guy with payas and a big strimel on his head. It also includes the guy who's wearing all black. We have to stop judging our brothers and sisters based on what they call themselves, what kind of a kippah they have on their head or don't have at all, what they wear, whether it goes up or down, whether we're talking about those we would consider less observant than ourselves or more observant than ourselves. As it was said many, many years ago, the buck stops here. We are the ones who have control over the future of Judaism and whether or not we're pushing not just the next generation. I mean, we're sacrificing our kids, but not just our kids. It's our brothers and our sisters, both the blood brothers and sisters, the ones that, siblings, and the ones in our community, our friends. We're pushing them all to the sidelines because we confuse the difference between acceptance and approval. Now, you guys who have heard me talk, I pretty much put this in almost every talk that I do, but I'll say it again. It's because in Judaism, we so confuse the two terms acceptance and approval. And we think that if we don't approve of a choice that somebody is making, we cannot possibly accept them. And quite the opposite is true. We must learn to accept everybody as a human being, as B'Tselem Elokim, as made in the image of God, regardless of whether or not we can agree with them or approve of their choices. And it's only when we start to do that, when we start to generate from a place of love, whether or not we're feeling it back. I don't know whether I love Facebook or I hate Facebook. I was on Facebook just this morning, and somebody had a bad experience with somebody they would put in a different box than themselves. And it could be either direction either, which is really the very sad part, right? Without telling you, you don't know whether I'm talking about a secular or a dati person talking about a Haredi person, or a Haredi person talking about a secular or a dati person. Because unfortunately, it's going both directions, and it has got to stop. So this person is talking about this extremely bad, I would even say abusive situation that they went through, and how these other people, they're the ones who are causing the problem, and they need to apologize and they need to make things right. And, I started to say that to rely on the person who started the problem to rectify the problem is stupid. It's not good thinking, because There is no way that without some kind of a help, without some kind of a crisis or a catalyst to change their thinking, there's no reason to think that they're suddenly going to somehow fix the problem. What we have to do is we have to generate from a place of love and acceptance, even though we don't agree and don't approve, and or don't approve. And what happens is something magical happens because we're very powerful people, and we put out a frequency, so to speak. We exist on a vibrational pattern. I'm not going to get into all of the details. Many of you have heard a lot of this before, but we really do. We radiate what's going on inside of us. Some people talk about, the law of attraction and all of this stuff, but it's true. God, the whole world that we live in is waves, right? There's light waves and sound waves, and we function on also waves. And so people really do feel and receive from us what we're putting out. They have done experiments that show when they got a bunch of people together, it was really fascinating. There was some country that was at war or something, and they got about 1,000 people together to sit down. I don't know how they managed to get 1,000 people together, but they got them together to sit down and just for one whole day to radiate peace and love in their city. It was in a city, it wasn't at war, it was a city that had a lot of violence going on. And so these 1,000 people sat and they radiated, they broadcasted peace and love for this day. And then they went back and they looked at the statistics, and during that day, the violence was down by something like 50% in the city, and there were no murders that day, and there was it was an unbelievable thing, because God put this in. It's not hocus pocus, it's not weird stuff. It sounds weird, but it's not really weird stuff. God put all of this into the world. He made us B'Tselem Elohim. He gave us power. And we have the ability to change the world that we live in. And we have the ability to influence the lives of other people who are in our lives. But it has to start with us. Waiting for somebody else to make the change is never going to accomplish anything. But if we all got together and decided and made it a conscious effort that we were all going to radiate peace and love to these people, whoever it is that we consider our enemies within the Jewish people, or just all of the Jewish people, it would actually change the way that people relate to each other. And the people who are out there being the abusers, one of two things are going to happen. Either they're going to fall in line with what we're sending out, or they're just not going to have an effect, because we're all going to be living on a different plane of existence, so to speak. So we must learn to see every Jew, regardless of how they dress, how they observe, how they behave, or any of these other things, as part of us, as part of the Jewish people, and stop behaving in such a way that pushes them farther away from Judaism and farther away from God, because really we're as guilty as Amalek when we push our brothers and sisters away. And again, it's not just the ones who don't know anything about Judaism that we're pushing away. We're also pushing away those who are where we would consider ourselves or even more observant. So whether somebody considers themselves Haredi or Hasidish or Orthodox or Modern Orthodox or Dati Lumi or whatever other labels that we can put on, we're all brothers and sisters, and we're all in this together. And if we push them to the outer edges and the fringes, guess who they're ripe for the picking for? We're giving them into Amalek's hands. We're not even fighting. We're not even putting up a fight. Forget a rear guard. We're pushing them out there. And so the third part of the solution, right? The first part of the solution is that we need to make sure that what we're giving over to the next generation is not just a bunch of rules, but it is about having a relationship with God, and a meaningful and deep and relevant relationship with God. And you know what? Sometimes the behaviors will reflect that relationship. It may not in the way that we expect it to, but that's part of that. That their relationship with God, even our children's relationships with God, are not going to look like our relationship with God. And we may not agree with the choices that they make. We may not even approve of them. But we must accept them. Right? Step 2 was that we need to make sure that we ourselves are plugged in and that we're experiencing a deep and meaningful relationship with God. And there are lots and lots of resources out there that will help us to do that. You know, depending on your persuasion, whether you're talking about Chabad or you're talking about Aish, or I've just started something I'm calling Teshuvah, Ignite Your Soul. There are lots and lots of places out there that you can get teachings and that you can see amazing videos and you can learn and you can get connected. And there are people, you can do Partners in Torah and other different things, and you can get connected with people who can help you to connect with Hashem in this really deep and meaningful way. Because if you don't have it, there's no way that you can give it over to anybody else. And the third part, which I kind of already touched on in my summary of the first part, but it really all boils down to the fact that we need to see each other as part of the same body, not just the same family, but pieces of the same body. You know, I might not think very much of my little toe, but I guarantee that if I stub my little toe, I'm going to feel it. I'm going to feel it everywhere in my body. And I'm going to then favor that foot, that toe, and I'm going to guard it, and I'm going to be careful about it until it's healed. And we need to see our fellow Jews in that same way, as a part of the body. And even if it's not a part of the body that we necessarily want to look at or that we really want to have anything to do with on a regular basis, we still have to regard it as an integral part of who we are. And we need to be very careful to guard it and to protect it. And in this case, it has to do with helping them to connect to God and to showing them a Judaism that is about having a relationship, and it's about love, and it's about tolerance. And I don't mean tolerance as in tolerating things that are the word I'm looking for is not repugnant, but you know what I'm saying? That, you know, there are things that people do that we cannot accept. The things that they do that we cannot approve. But who they are, that never changes. And that must always be accepted. And that is the solution to fighting Amalek. And so, I'm going to tell you a little story. I wanted something a little more relevant, but I think that you'll get the point. About 200 years ago, the German church, the church in Germany, created a missionary organization called the Moravian Brethren. And they created the most successful missionary organization, I think, of all history. Well, there were two guys from the Moravian Brethren who had heard about a leper colony in Africa where the German government was not allowing people to go. You know, people would go on these trips and they would minister in these leper colonies. They would bring them supplies that they probably couldn't get where they were located, and they would also, you know, bring them encouragement. And I mean, in this case, they were Christians, but, you know, they would share from the Bible with them and whatever. So the German government said nobody can go to this leper colony and come back to Germany because we're afraid that the disease will spread and there'll be an epidemic, and we just can't do it. So in order to control the disease, nobody can go there and come back. If you've been there, you cannot come back. So these two guys realized that there was a problem because nobody was going to minister in this leper colony in Africa, and these people were suffering. They were not only suffering not having the supplies, but they didn't have any leadership. They didn't have any guidance. They didn't have anybody to encourage them. And so they made the commitment, these two men, that they were going to go to this leper colony, even though they knew that it meant that they would never be able to return to Germany. Basically, they were willing to give up their lives for the sake of what they believed. And in fact, that is also part of the MO of Amalek. Because Hashem said that he's going to be battling Amalek in every generation. Amalek, it says, doesn't fear God. And he clearly doesn't give up. That is the commitment of Amalek. So now the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we have that kind of commitment? Are we willing, and thank God nobody's actually asking us to give our lives, but would we be willing to give our lives for the sake of our brothers, regardless of what they look like, regardless of what label we'd put on them? Oh, Pirkei Avot 2:21 says that it's not incumbent upon us to finish the task, but we're not free to withdraw from it. We have to at least make the first step. Have a meaningful fast.